Hi, welcome to Sacred Enzyme. I'm Stacy. I hope you're doing well today. So today I wanted to go back to some of the other stuff that I've been talking about in the past. And I don't know if you're new to the channel, I've done a lot of explorations around Florida, finding old world things and also looking into my own family history. And one of the things that I noticed is that we have a lot of opinions about things that happened in the past, and we really have to dig deeper into what the laws were, what was going on at the time, because, you know, it's easy to say, oh, the Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Yeah, that's easy to say, but what about all the other stuff that was going on in the country at that time? So one of the things that I've talked about in the live stream that I did last week was that you know, all of the census records for, I think it was 1890 or 1900, they were destroyed in a fire, in the Montgomery, Alabama courthouse burnt down. So I wasn't like able to find a lot of genealogy records on some of my family members, but one of them was my great grandpa Miller. So I kept thinking, you know, it's kind of strange that you would have these courthouses that were burned down in the South, and none of them were burned down in the North. And why was that? What was going on in the South? What was going on in the South that they burnt down the courthouses? What were they trying to cover up? What were they trying to cover up? What documents? What documents? So there's a young man named Jared Booster that does, he does photography snapshots, and he'll do a little background on a certain city or, you know, someplace that's in the world, a lot of stuff in the United States. Well, today he was talking about Alabama, and I was like, oh, here we go, because there's a lot of hidden history in the state of Alabama, and most people think that Alabama is all about backwards people and stuff like that. Well, let me just tell you, that's what they want you to think about Alabama, because if you think that it's not worth looking at, then you never will. I just got a thump from Theo on my watch. Okay, so interesting thing is that a lot of these courthouses in the South, they were burnt down. They were burnt down on Sherman's March. So I want to talk a little bit about a theory that I have, because this is what kind of lining up with the research that I've been doing on why all this stuff happened. You know, of course we know it was a reset, guys. It's not a mystery to any of us. The question is who had what and who was here, right? This is what we got to get to the bottom of. Okay, so one of the things that I found interesting when I started doing my genealogy in 2001 was I started looking at graves and different things like this in Alabama. And then I went back to Alabama in 2011, and my cousin and I were trying to trace back a land deed that belonged to our family. It was like for, I can't remember how many acres, 100 and something acres of land that they had. And then we were trying to find out what happened to it. So we were down in Hamilton, Alabama, down at the courthouse, and we were digging through all this paperwork and all of these legal paperworks until we found a copy of the deed for the land that was supposed to be our family's. And we found out that it was taken over by a paper mill company. And I thought, well, who in our family would have sold all of the property to the paper mill company? All right. And this was my third great grandmother, Mary Magdalene Abels. That was my second great grandfather's mother. She was named Mary Magdalene. Well, anyway, I was like, why would they do that? Why would they do that when they were farmers? And, you know, my family has been really, really poor. And when my dad went and lived with his grandparents because they raised him, my dad said that they were just old, poor sharecroppers, which I thought was really interesting. So, you know, so I started looking at this with a different set of eyes, because something just didn't add up to me. So I've been doing quite a bit of research on this, and one of the things that has kept coming up to me over and over again is that I need to look at the laws and what was going on at that time period. So this is what I started digging into. Well, what I've come to find out was there were only certain courthouses that were burnt down. Some of them were selectively burnt down that were kind of in the midway space. And then the ones up north were not burned down at all. And I thought, well, that's weird. Why would they just do that to the South and nowhere else? So let me tell you some of the stuff that I found. So buildings that were going on that were burnt down, courthouses, okay. One of the themes that happened when these courthouses were burnt down is that land grants were lost, people's property deeds were lost, tax rolls prior to 1800 were lost, indigenous treaties were lost, and French and Spanish administrative documents were lost, and pre-statehood maps were lost. Repeatedly not lost were post-war property titles, new state legal frameworks, and corporate charters established after the Civil War. So large swaths of the Deep South were first, well, they were owned by somebody obviously before, right? And at this point in time, we say that it's the Tartar Aryans, which were the Moorish people. These were amalgamation, a group of people. Then it was the French colonists, then it was the Spanish, then it was the British, and then it was America. Okay, so this means that we've got multiple overlapping legal systems that are coming in here. I mean, I know when the Randolphs were here, they wanted, Thomas Jefferson wanted Meriwether Lewis to do this expedition across the United States, and they were looking for stuff. And, you know, people can put in my comments or put whatever they want about, you know, this, that, and the other, but the fact of the matter is that they were looking for something. They were looking for something. There's evidence in the letters that Thomas Jefferson was getting that he was looking for the Tartars. He was looking for Native American groups, and he was trying to establish who was here before the Jews, the Hebrews, okay? All right, so if you have to think about it, so if you had land ownership, right, and your deed was in the courthouse, right, and then they came and burned down the courthouse, and that was your proof of your ownership, what do you think happened? What do you think happened? Exactly. That's exactly what did happen. They took everybody's property. This is why farmers that were once farmers became sharecroppers, because they no longer owned the property that they lived on. And the reason why was because they burnt down the courthouse so they could seize their land. So do all these fires now make sense, guys? No, the truck. Right. So courthouses were memory vaults, and so burning them resetted who owned the land, who was recognized, and who had any kind of legal standing. Okay? So what other records are kept in these courthouses, right? We could only just imagine. So northern land systems were more uniform, less layered, already aligned with the federal law. Remember, we had our 13 colonies, right? In the South, the land was older. It was owned by the French. Remember, they had to buy that from the French. And then in Georgia, the state of Georgia, they had a huge, and this was the key pin right here. This is what sent me on this rabbit hole, was I started looking up my cousin, John Randolph of Roanoke. He was in politics right before the Civil War. And he wanted there to be legal action taken against these governors of Georgia that had did an illegal land selling of all of these other parts of Georgia, because before, Georgia was extended all the way over into Alabama and some of these other states that is around the state of Georgia. So what they did is that they did a backdoor deal, and they sold a bunch of this land. Well, Thomas Randolph of Roanoke said that they were violating the Constitution and that they had to be held accountable, and that if you didn't hold accountability, then anybody could just come along later and say, hey, you let them get away with it. You don't have a constitution, right? If it's rules for thee and not for me, then what do you got here? You got nothing, right? And so this is why John Randolph, he had to go. He had to go. And he died very unexpected. Well, he didn't die unexpectedly because it'd been a slow drip. But, you know, he died very instantaneously. And so did Peyton Randolph, who also happened to be another rabble-rouser, the first president of the 13 colonies, and not going with the system. So the system was being put in place all the way back from when James came over here. Because, you know, James was two bloodlines, and he was obviously working on his own behalf. And so he sent my family over here to get him out of his hair. That's what I personally think, because they always bucked the system, right? They were the 13th archetype set outside of the wheel. So let me tell you what John Randolph said about what he said about these politicians. He said corruption. You may talk of checks and balances, but when the purse and the sword are in the same hands, liberty is gone. And he wanted these governors to be held accountable. And so John Randolph of Roanoke was born in 1773, and he was, in my opinion, murdered in 1833. And he was a U.S. congressman and a senator, and he was fiercely independent, anti-centralization, and suspicious of federal consolidation. So John Randolph of Roanoke emerges during the early cracks that eventually lead to Civil War, an expanding of federal power, sectional tension, economic divergence, and constitutional strain. He shows up before the explosion, just like Peyton Randolph did before the Revolution. There's a pattern here, guys. So John Randolph opposed, now get what, this is what got him killed. Centralized banking, expansionist wars, guys, you hearing what I'm saying here? Federal overreach, and erosions of state sovereignty. And he famously broke with his own family. He had an out with Thomas Jefferson, John Madison, and his own political allies. So this tells you that he wasn't playing party politics, guys. He was defending the system. What struck me is that Randolph appears at both fracture times in American history. Peyton is right there before the Revolution, trying to hold procedural legitimacy together. And then John Randolph of Roanoke shows up decades later, warning about consolidation and constitutional drift long before the Civil War. It's the same footprint. Early warning, ignored, followed by collapse. So I think that we need to look at what the name of Alabama was before it became Alabama. It was called Maubila, which kind of still looks like Alabama, right? It represents a pre-colonial administrative center, a city that should have left massive documentation, a population that vanished from the written record. If indigenous provinces, French colonial government, and early land systems were in place, they were all legally inconvenient, guys. The courthouses and burning them up, it accomplishes one act, which, if the courthouse land records are destroyed and a landholder could not reproduce their title, they're at serious risk of losing their property. So what do you guys think happened? That's exactly what happened. So, back in the day, ownership depended on a chain of title. So if you couldn't prove it, then you lose it. Prove it or lose it, right? Maybe that's where that old thing came from. So yeah, the state would no longer recognize your claim. So, the question is why were these being burnt down? Well, I think that we know now. The other question is who burnt these down? Because I have a theory on that too. And I just call it the Lavender Mafia. There's a reason that we ended up with all these nunneries and all of these sisters and all of these Catholic schools, right? The Indian schools and all these things. There's a reason for that, guys. They were instrumental in flipping everything. The Lavender Mafia. It's these two groups that everybody talks about. They talk about the Greys, right, from Israel, and they talk about the Roman Catholic Church. But what most people don't understand is that they're two feathers, they're two wings on the same bird, guys. They've been working together for a very, 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 very long time. Keep all of us asleep. So I think that this is definitely affording us further exploration on these fires and what the real reason was behind it. It was to burn up paperwork. It was to burn up people's land deeds so they could take their property away. It was a land grab and a reset. So I'd love to hear what you have to say. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, share the videos, And if you have any questions, or if you'd be interested in being a part of the heirloom seed project that we're working on, sharing heirloom seeds across the seas, and the Earth Exchange program, you can send me an email at hstacy90@gmail.com. Thanks for watching Sacred Enzyme. Catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.